Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy. If you've been following the channel recently, you know that we've kind of freed ourselves up now. We finished Marvel, which was a massive retrospective that you did, George. We've finished the Oscars. Where to now? We have carte blanche, and we've decided to throw ourselves straight headlong into another retrospective, even bigger than the MCU. Well, for now it is anyway. 24 films, I believe. We are taking on the James Bond franchise in anticipation, finally this year, the release of No Time to Die. We have timed it to perfection, where hopefully, all going well, let's just say that for right now, if it does meet the release date, all of these reviews that we have for each and every single James Bond film will lead directly into that release date, which will be the final Daniel Craig film. It won't be the final James Bond film. This is a franchise that's been going on for almost 60 years. And I guess we'll talk more about finally getting to this retrospective in just a second, because this has been one that's been long in the making on the channel. We've wanted to do a James Bond retrospective for a number of years now, I think even all the way back to when Spectre first came out. But we've started it now. You can see above Dr. No, there's no turning back now. This is happening.
Yeah, this has been something I've been very excited for a very, very long time. Obviously, with Corona, this film, well, pre-Corona, I'm sure we'll bring this up in the No Time to Die video, but that was due, I believe that was due out in November 2019, potentially even September. Then it got delayed. Then it got delayed to that February after the leg break. Then it was delayed to that April. And then Corona happened. And then it was delayed to, was it October or November?
So, yeah.
And then it was delayed again to April. And here we are, knowing full well it is going to come out this September now. What we can actually say, this was delayed to October, and then they pulled it back 2 weeks. So they even wanted to change it again. Incredible cursed production, but it's been a nightmare to organize a series that's got 24 films in for us to do, because a bit of behind the scenes gossip before we get into it. Our plan from the get-go was to Bond across like 2 months. What we basically did with Marvel was our Bond plan, and I think we're all in agreement very politely that I'm glad Bond was delayed, only because I think it would have been harder to have done all those in 2 months, but also Bond works so much better weekly, and that's a weird Bond thing, which we'll get into in a bit. But before we sort of get into it, we're going to introduce how we want to format the series, all that kind of stuff, our history with Bond, and of course then we will talk about Dr. No itself. But first up, we're going to bring up our socials. So if you are new to the channel, if you're discovering us talking about Bond for the first time, comment below your thoughts. Obviously, all of these films are old. There'll be full spoilers throughout. Comment all your thoughts, new, old, opinions have changed. Hit that like button and do subscribe. As we said, if you're a Bond fan, then just this is chapter 1 out of 24. So 25 of No Time to Die. It's going to be a crazy almost 6 months, which is mental to think about. And if you're even newer than that, if you want to know about our social medias, where you can find us, where we have updates to our videos, hit us up on our socials, which is Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, letterboxd.com/Cinema Savvy, and we have a link to our TeePublic store in the description below. As well as that link to the TeePublic store, we have a couple of new designs which we're going to quickly throw up on the stream, because we have, of course, a link to the James Bond logo. If you look at that logo there, it's in the description. It's cut.ly/shop Cinema Savvy. Couple of new designs from the Oscar season, which is just finished, from our Marvelwood videos, which are kind of on hiatus because they'll be back when Loki's back, and there's only 4 more films this year. And of course, the Bond t-shirt in the middle. So have a check of that. You can not just get t-shirts. There's like mugs, stickers, all that kind of stuff. I'm probably going to get stickers because I like stuff like that, which is a bit weird. But I guess it's time to really get into this. This is, again, a discussion I think you mentioned previously when we spoke off camera, that this is something went back as far as our channel's origin. When this channel started in 2015, Spectre came out that year, and the fact there's not been one Bond film since is also insane.
It's mad.
Due to many other reasons, considering they used to sort of get like a film out a year, which we'll get into over the next couple of weeks. But I want to, first of all, should we talk our history of Bond, or should we bring up some more about the series? I don't really know how we should do this.
Let's bring up more about the series, because this is sort of like the introductory portion. We will get into the film properly in a minute, but the schedule for what you can expect from this retrospective. So as you mentioned, we did initially plan to do, I think it was 3 Bond reviews a week, which was absolutely mad. And, we love James Bond, but I don't know if we love it that much to watch 3 a week. Maybe we do. But I think we've got a much more manageable schedule. So for this first week, at least, you can expect 2 James Bond reviews. We are pre-recording this one, but this will be going up as you obviously watch it on the Tuesday, and you can expect From Russia With Love this Friday, this week. And then after that point, then you're going to expect one a week. So I guess we're kind of doing almost like a TV show pilot thing where we release the first two out of the gate, and then you can expect it once a week. And yeah, this is just going to keep taking us through the summer months, and it's just beautiful to see that progression of the movie posters as well as we go throughout the decades, taking us into August, and then we'll be rounding off as we move into the final month where we get the release of No Time to Die, which will be at the back end of September. So yeah, it's mad to think that we will be finishing this series in a number of months' time. But that's kind of our introduction to the series itself. So we'll go into our history with Bond now, because this is also kind of interesting. We kind of have very different, well, completely different histories with the franchise on this. Still to this day, I have not watched every single James Bond film. There are two crucial Bonds that I haven't seen any of their films, which is Timothy Dalton and Pierce Brosnan. And I know for men, especially our age group, I think Pierce Brosnan, well, he was Bond, wasn't he, when we were growing up? My first James Bond film I ever watched was Casino Royale, Daniel Craig. This may change, but still as of right now, I know we probably will be doing a ranking. That is probably my favorite Bond film. He's not my favorite Bond, but it is my favorite Bond film so far. As I said, that could all change. And I think just growing up, because my parents have been James Bond fans, not massive James Bond fans, but with James Bond, it's always on the TV in the UK at some point, whether it's the weekends, whether it tends to be like holidays, really, doesn't it? You tend to get a James Bond movie on around Christmas time or Easter or something like that. So I was always aware of it. I mean, James Bond is just a character that, as I mentioned, almost 60 years, he has easily seeped into the pop culture. You know the theme even before you've seen the film. You know what the character's all about and all the traits and the aspects to the franchise itself. So you're always aware of it, but I don't think until Casino Royale I'd ever seen a single James Bond film beginning to end until that film. So I kind of stayed with the Craig ones more, obviously, because they're more recent, the ones you can expect to see. Saw Spectre and Skyfall and Spectre at the cinema. And I've kind of stayed with those. I have gone back, and when we did originally plan to do this retrospective, I think I did go from Dr. No, and I think the final one that I watched was whichever Roger Moore film was before Octopussy. I think Octopussy was going to be the next one that I was going to watch, but for whatever reason, I got taken off it. That's my history with the Bond franchise. So I'm very much more of a casual fan. Maybe I'll be a full-blown fan by the end of this retrospective, but I know you, George, this has been part of your life for many years.
Yeah, it's this, and this is what I love about that we're going to have, you know, whether there's two of us, three of us at times, this is where we're going to get, which is great. I love videos when it's just talking about things we've grown up with, Spider-Man, Star Wars, Harry Potter, all that stuff. But when it's very much someone that's maybe new, not as familiar, and someone that's, I don't want to say it's not a Star Wars level to me, but James Bond to me is the triumph of British cinema. I'm not very patriotic, but when people start talking about British cinema, James Bond is the thing that comes up for me. There is nothing more. The highlight of my the year working at Pine Studios was knowing full well that there was a Bond film being filmed there and I was working on it. I don't mind getting out straight away. The James Bond films have had a massive impact on me growing up, getting into film, everything about it, learning more about the Broccolis, all that stuff. It has been tremendous. And it's really fascinating going back because I'm going to get very nostalgic now, and you'll remember this, no doubt. When we were younger, we didn't have box sets, which you can see behind me. We didn't have stuff like that. We would watch them on ITV. They would sometimes be on a Saturday afternoon. And I remember my first Bond film, which would explain that for a lot of people, is The World Is Not Enough, for two reasons. Number one, I had the PS1 game, which I will bring out for the World's Not Enough review that is in the garage. That game, you know, editing the gun barrel sequence, I have not seen the blood so much since I was dying all the time as a kid playing it, because that would happen when you die. That was even before I played GoldenEye at my friends' houses, and James Bond was this massive thing for me. And I think it was great watching as a kid, and not that you didn't know there's an order, there was just so many of them. And then it would have been around the time Casino Royale came out. It wasn't the first Bond film I saw at the cinema, Die Another Day was, but I remember watching that with one of my best friends from primary school at the time, and my dad, and it was just incredible. I don't know anything about poker, and I still really don't. I played a bit of poker in lockdown. I was there like, is this a straight flush? Is this a James Bond term? And after that, it kind of catapulted where I was bought this incredible book, which I've brought up because anyone that went to school with me would have seen this book as well. this encyclopedia was everything. We always hype up the DK Star Wars dictionaries, but any and all James Bond stuff, this had it. Gadgets, girls, music, films, Bond, anything. This was one of the greatest things I've ever been bought as a Christmas present. You can see how worn it is as well, how battered it is. And this also, my parents have this up in the lounge still, in the bookshelf. They've never told me, take it up, put it to your room, because they know with this. But yeah, it's been exciting for me, and I'm not going to sort of jump in and just. I could have a discussion about the history of James Bond easily, but we've got 6 months to have these discussions. But what I will say was the turning point of liking it even more was the 50th anniversary. You know, everyone was in on the hype that year. You know, my very first paycheck, I turned 16 that year. This box set came out 3 weeks after my first ever paycheck as just anything, first ever job. Mm-hmm. And that is a massive thing for me. And I remember doing all of them in order, was ready for Skyfall. And I'd never watched them sequentially. I'd seen a lot of them, not all of them. Or there was some I think I hadn't seen. Turns out I had, but I might have seen 3/4 of it. And it was phenomenal doing that in 2012. And then I ended up going to the museum before it moved to London. It was right down south in the country. And 2012 was the peak of James Bond, as far as I'm concerned. And it's a franchise that is very, very near and dear to my heart. Probably growing up, to me, you've got Star Wars, Harry Potter, the Spider-Man films, and James Bond. The sort of first when I was like 10, 12, pre-2008, pre-Dark Knight, they were probably the big four for me. Mm-hmm. And I'm delighted to finally get into it, because we've been going for over 10 minutes. I haven't even spoke about Doctor's Name. We're still going to hold off speaking about Doctor's Name, because we're going to, in case we have other people on, like the Avengers videos, we'd ask each other questions and whatnot. Do you have a favourite James Bond?
See, this is very tough for me, as I mentioned, because I haven't seen 2 of them in action properly. I know a lot of people love Brosnan, and I'm sure I'll love Brosnan when I get to his films. As of right now, of the people that I've seen as playing James Bond, it's a cliched answer. I think inherently I've got to go with Sean Connery. I do have a soft spot for Roger Moore. I really do. Those films get very silly, and I do love his incarnation of Bond. But I think when I close my eyes and I think of James Bond, and we're going to be talking about this scene from this movie anyway, that introductory scene to him just encapsulates everything that James Bond is to me. It's the wisecracks. It's, we're going to be talking, these are very dated films now. 1962, the first Doctor No film. There are a lot of things that wouldn't fly by today's audiences probably, although, we'll probably have a discussion when we get to that kind of stuff that is the character. But fundamentally, Sean Connery for me, the voice, the look, the mannerisms, he just nailed it 100%.
Yeah, he's one of them, I think, Connery, where I don't think there is a bad opinion to have your favourite Bond. I'm going to be polite and say that unless you're Australian, no one's favourite Bond's George Lazenby, and that's purely down to the fact that he had one film and everyone else had a minimum of 2. Mm-hmm. And it was a very different film, very different experience, which we'll get to when we get to Majesty's Secret Service. But Connery is, to me, the definitive Bond. And I know it'll be the same. Exactly what you said. You close your eyes, you think of it, it is him. For me, my Bond is Brosnan. And I think this is very much the introductory point that if you're a certain age, watching it for the first time, in the same way the Star Wars prequel trilogy is, that's my Star Wars for me in a polite term. I love the originals, don't get me wrong, but that was my era. To me, it was Brosnan. I think because of the game, because of that, I didn't even mention the words. Not enough. I forgot to mention what my history was. We had my dad recorded. Remember, he used to record TV, so a lot like a video. So I had a cassette player of The World's Not Enough growing up, because we never had it. We didn't have DVDs. It was pre-DVD, and I remember it was about 5-10 minutes into the film. So I never knew why they were having a chase on the Thames. I didn't know what the cause of it was for many, many years. But that's I think everything about Brosnan for me. I love everything about him. And as even I've got older, I know that some of them are cheesy, some of them aren't great, but he is to me like this blend of Connery and Roger Moore. And I think that's why he works so well. And I just love him, and I won't watch Mamma Mia on principle that I can't bring myself to see him sing and dance. And I absolutely adore him.
Absolutely. Right. I think we will actually jump into the film now. This isn't going to be like the start of every single video. This is obviously the first one we're doing, so this is very much an introduction. So we will get into the film now. So obviously we're kicking off with 1962's Dr. No, directed by Terence Young, based off the novel of the same name from 1958 by Ian Fleming. I do want to stress that I haven't read any of Ian Fleming's novels, so I get the impression that the films aren't particularly close to, that they've told them out of order, for example. I think originally the film they wanted to kick off with was Thunderball, actually. But I think there was a rights issue. I'm not going to lie, I don't know all the ins and outs about the behind the scenes. I have done a little bit of reading beforehand, but as I mentioned, I'm a very casual fan, and you're just beset with loads of names and producers and who could have played Bond and who could have been this and how it could have turned out. So yeah, we'll get into this. This is the one that started it all. I think we discussed a little bit before we went live our sort of immediate thoughts on this. I have taken notes, and I will be taking notes on my phone for all the Bond films that I watch to keep track of them all, because there are 24 of them. As a film, as it is, I think it's a fine first outing for Bond. You have to kind of rank it in retrospective as well, because we have seen some of the later Bond films, so we kind of know where ultimately it leads to. I would probably rank this slightly lower as a film. I don't think it's all that great, but it's that respect, isn't it? It being the first James Bond film. And that being said, there are some elements from this. We talk about the formula, and that's going to be a big discussion when we get to Goldfinger for sure. That was the first Bond film where it's like, okay, all the pieces are together now, and that's kind of the framework they've ran with since that movie. But there are still elements with it, and that's kind of how we're going to break our review up as well. We're going to talk about Bond himself, the villain, the Bond girl, the Bond theme, all are crucial elements to the franchise. I think it's more that reverence and respect. Ursula Andres, Sean Connery's introduction to Bond, the Bond theme, the gun barrel, everything that you hold dear to the Bond film, all did start from this. So I think that's where a lot of our review is kind of going to be framed from in that regard.
Yeah, it's a weird one, Dr. No, because it is that first one, and I'm the same. I've not read Ian Fleming's novels. I've never gone to them, and it always amazes me that this is the guy that everyone obviously knows for Bond, and it's like, and if you knew, trivia question, he also wrote Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which I always,
I didn't.
It's like the ultimate pub, because like name a book done by Ian Fleming that isn't James Bond. It's one of those, and like I said, I'm not familiar with the writing of it, but I think if you look at in terms of his life, one thing I want to mention really with Dr. No, that this is the first one. No one would have known what this would go on to be. I'm sure they would have thought, back in the 60s, British cinema, you'd get a film every year. It was very much the studio system. All of these always shot at Pinewood. I always think of the Carry On films as well, which would have been as big at the time, where they were always non-stop. They were always making more and more and more, and not to sort of compare areas, but the turnaround of the 60s compared to the 10s is very different for so many reasons. Back then they just make a film, do it, edited, it's out. It's like a student short film, it'll be out in a couple of months. Whereas, nowadays it's we've got to prepare pre-production of this or that and everything, scheduling, marketing, press tours, all of that stuff. And it's why it's amazing as the Bond films go on, the gaps between releases just get significantly bigger and bigger, which is incredible. But Dr. No, watching this, I think the first time I saw it was when I got that Blu-ray box. I'd never watched the first one. I was always a bit nervous too, because I always loved Goldfinger, and everyone would whisper, like my granddad's favourite Bond films from Rush with Love, and I never liked it. I was like, I'm scared to watch Dr. No. But I'm not a massive fan of this film, in truth. And the same as you, I respect it. It's really hard. You can't not respect this film for me, just in terms of being the first one of this series. The fact that you've got the character in the title, Dr. No, is only in it for like 5 minutes as well, and I still don't really get it being played. But watching it again today, it's a weird one. But I think from what you need to set things up, kind of like, we know the formula's not there yet. We know it's going to come in Goldfinger. It feels like a polite prequel.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it isn't, but it's very much like, okay, when the formula kicks in, we know how they're all going to go. But the first tease, that very much puts it a bit edgier, because it's not as well written. I don't mean it as disrespectful, but because it's not a formula, it's its own entity. And I think Dr. No is one of the longest slow burners of all the Bond films.
No, go on. Sorry. I thought you were gonna.
No, all done. Sorry, I was
Oh,
trying to
all
think. What I
done.
forgot.
No, yeah. What I do respect this film as well is that this was a very, very low budget film. I think it had like a 1 mil budget, and I was doing a bit of reading about the production designers as well, and the fact that they had to work with what they had. It was all done on the cheap, and you can kind of see that as well, like a little bit. Like a lot of it was filmed in location in Jamaica, and then you have like the crude, almost like Batman 60s kind of sets in some points, especially when you get to Dr. No's lair at the end. I was doing a bit of reading about the aquarium that's in Dr. No's lair at the end, and the fact that it was a rear projection and they had to use stock footage, and they got the only footage they had access to or could afford was footage of goldfish, so they had to blow it up so big so it looked like big fish in an aquarium tank. A lot of the props in the backgrounds were sort of like cardboard cutout paintings and everything like that. And I do have respect for older films that do that, and even just low budget films in general, where they have to use so many sleight of hands and tricks of the trade, and it all looks great. And I think because this was still in the 60s, and a lot of those early Bond films, looking back, are very cheesy. It is kind of charming and endearing to watch them now go back. And I guess that's also a thing with Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where you see the kind of films that were made around that time and the TV shows, and there is a charm inherently to stuff that came out around the 60s decade, I think, and it shines through in this as well. This film, with the success of this film, it spawned many copycats. A lot of the spy genre is kind of reinvigorated after this. But you could tell that they were pushing for sequels, I think, because, they had the rights to the property and all the books that Ian Fleming had done. I don't know how many books he'd written at that point. I imagine, he was steeped in quite the ways, and they knew that they probably wanted to get more films out of them. That kind of comes into the casting of Bond as well. They wanted to sign someone who would be up for returning as part of a series. I think there are many names that have been mentioned as people that almost played Bond. I think it's almost kind of like Chinese whispers. Like everyone probably mentioned at some point they were asked to be Bond in some way. It's like a sort of story that they tell everyone at a social gathering. But Carrie Grant was one of the big names I remember at the time, but he only wanted to sign on for one film. They ended up giving it to Connery, obviously, who was up for returning for multiple pictures.
Yeah, and I think that was a big thing. I think what's amazing now is the era we live in, sort of social media side. Who is the next Bond is probably the longest ongoing film discussion over decades, because it's always been a question every year. Doesn't matter how many contracts, there's always who's next. Rewind the clocks like 8 years ago. It's the Idris Elba talks, who would have made a phenomenal Bond. Mm-hmm. Too old now. And that's not me being ageist. That's not right fact. And there's so many things changing up. But going back to the very first one, it's a new entity. It's not, James Bond doesn't have the weight that it does now of, modern day actors signing up to Bond. You're kind of signing your life away. You will always be James Bond after that. After you sign that dotted paper and get in the film, you will always be James Bond. You become him. You are synonymous with him. If Henry Cavill ends up being Bond, he'll be known more for being Bond than Superman. Which is a discussion for another time, probably in a really good way. But I really want to mention as well David Niven. That was who Ian Fleming wanted to play Bond, and he, of course, did play him in the 1967 Casino Royale adaptation, which is an interesting one. So we had a comment on our announcement video, actually, which I wanted to bring up. Obviously can't bring it up because it's another video, but so last we're going to be doing that. We are only doing the Eon production, so the main 24. So we won't be doing Never Say Never or the original Casino Royale. It's just a lot easier to do it this way. Not OCD with me, but it's very much, this is, what I'm like Chris with like canon and what's valid and what isn't. It's like, it is these. But really quickly as well, I think another big thing with Bond is the producers of it. You have, of course, the Broccoli family. Well, in this one, we've got Harry Saltzman and Albert R. Broccoli, which together were there, I think, until the mid-70s. Can't remember which film they sort of fell out after.
Man with the Golden Gun, I think I read that they had I don't know why they fell out. I don't know what the reason was, but that was the film that sort of broke them apart, which is ironic because it's probably easily one of the best Bond films in my opinion. But
yeah, I'm curious. Maybe near the time we'll have a look into that, but that'd be fun. But the Broccoli family is Bond as far as I'm concerned. His daughter does it now, who's been fine as a producer, and she's very honest on the spot with it. She's very open about doing sequels, spin-offs. She never hides away from the conversation. They said to her, would you have a female Bond? She always says, no, I'd rather create a new character. I'd like to have a new spy character we could use if we ever wanted to do it. But there won't be a Jane Bond, and not to sort of bring that sort of politics into it. But that is a discussion we get a lot more of now. And I love the fact that, I know it's maybe a bit romantic, a bit past it, but the fact that the rights have stayed with this family from Dr. No through to today, almost 60 years. You know, I think she was a runner on some of the films in the 70s or 80s, I think she said in interviews and stuff. So that's a really big thing. And there's a really cool monument when I used to go to work near our office every day. There's an Albert R. Broccoli monument, which I thought was really cool because, of course, you've got the 007 stage, which is the biggest stage. And although Disney now own Pinewood, they're under contract, they cannot rename that stage. And the Sir Roger Moore in a new building. But studio stuff aside, you know, getting this casting right, I mean, it's really weird of Sean Connery because we all love him growing up. You know, he's Indiana Jones' dad and he was James Bond. And it was very weird watching this today, I will say, because this is the first time I've seen a Bond film since he passed away. And I wasn't emotional or anything like that, but it was really quite surreal for me watching this. But because I'm so synonymous with him as James Bond, it didn't feel like it was, you know, when I watched Star Wars and I think Carrie Fisher, and that's a different conversation, but I didn't have that effect with Connery. It was like, that's James Bond. And I don't know if that makes me look disrespectful. I don't mean it to come across in that way at all, but it's so synonymous, like they are one together. And that's why I love him in his early films. And I think they nailed what they were looking for as well.
Yeah, I mean, going back to your point there about not getting emotional in that way, I think it's just because he has become everlasting with that role, hasn't he? He is sort of immortalized as the character of James Bond. And I think when you can achieve that as a character, I know some actors might see that. And we don't know deep down what, you know, Connery's thoughts were. I think he did a lot of other roles, though, so he wasn't completely typecast in that role, because I know that some actors who, you know, Adam West maybe as Batman, where people only know them from that thing. And we see it with actors nowadays as well, with big franchises like Star Wars or something, where they can sort of like, I don't think that Connery ever got into that with Bond. I think he did enough stuff, but yeah, it was tremendous. And everything was riding on the casting. And, you know, maybe that's a discussion that we can have, you know, especially when we get to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, where I don't want to hate on George Lazenby too much, but if the casting is wrong or it doesn't fit, it's noticeable, and you have to get it right with the main character of James Bond. And they did in every way. Now, as I mentioned, I haven't read the books, but I know that I think the books are a lot more, the character of James Bond is a lot more serious, a lot more haunted. And I think that's maybe some of the elements that you get towards the Daniel Craig side of things. It's certainly in some aspects of the character, I think, the alcoholism, the womanizing, and it's not done in a kind of glorified way. He is this, you know, this spy action hero kind of character, but I think he's a bit more reserved in the books, and it goes into his psyche a little bit more. I know that one of the stipulations, I don't know if it's by the director or the writer, whoever it happened to be, we've got to remember as well, this is 1962, this is early 60s, and you know, they were saying that a lot of the elements of it, especially from the book, you know, it was very over-sexualized and this wouldn't get past the censors. Now we see things, you know, where he's fumbling around with Ursula Andres, and this probably wouldn't even make a PG nowadays. But, you know, back in the day, that would have been quite shocking, I think. You know, seeing Ursula Andres just walking around in a bikini the whole time, that is like hypersexualized probably for the 60s. And, you know, we get films now and that doesn't seem anything with what you see in films nowadays. So it is interesting. And even the violence as well. They were talking about the violence and the sexualized imagery, and they tried to downplay it and almost, I think the director said, put a tongue-in-cheek spin on it. If you add a joke in there and the one-liners, and by God, James Bond has 100 one-liners, it takes the edge off a little bit. And I can see it does work. I think they definitely double down on that when you get to the likes of Roger Moore, where it does get so ridiculously silly. I think it's kept to a minimum with this one. And, you know, talking about James Bond, I guess I'm going to sort of jump the gun here with one of my favorite scenes, but that introductory scene is so perfectly built up. You don't get an immediate reveal of him. You get, you know, someone's blocking the side of his face. It cuts to another shot and the camera's behind his shoulder, is at the table. And when you get that first name drop, that's the moment. That is the moment. And if you take any other moment in isolation out of this film, that is the moment where he is James Bond in that moment.
Yeah, and what I love about that, really, it's not even a big deal. There's no gallantly jumps into the screen, I'm Bond, James Bond. I know it does become that as the years go by and whatnot, but you know, he's just kind of sat there with the cigarette in his mouth, and it's like James Bond playing poker, and he just looks so cool. Still,
it's not an action scene, is it? What it would become, like an opening action scene with him, it's just flat out. You know, he's just at a poker table.
And I know that will be Casino Royale inspired. That obviously they did a different book, but if you're going to introduce him, you do it in that mannerism. And if you look at everything that comes as the years goes by, I don't think we get the shaken not stirred in this one, but all of those catchphrases, all of those formulaic things, they all stem from stuff that did come from the books, but the films would eventually map them out. And I think this one really starts pointing things in a direction where they haven't nailed it yet, but they're onto the verge of, here's a couple of things we're going to do, we're going to try to do. And kind of what you mentioned, sort of with the sort of the sexualization back in the 60s as well, a really big thing. Sort of, it's going to be interesting approaching these as we get every couple of films in. Maybe when we hit a different decade or a different Bond, or we know sort of the contextual where the world's at. One of the really big things with Bond is the villains, and looking at it as not Dr. No, but outright. If you look at those 60s, 70s ones, it was always the Russians. And you've seen the evolution of contextual villains in the 90s. It's like, oh, there's a couple of stray Russians. The Cold War was done, but I wonder what they're piping up about. Then we get to the noughties very much. It's like, here's just modern terrorism and all that stuff. And it's always fascinating looking at James Bond. And one of my old film lecturer always said this, that, you know, the issues that you can have with the James Bond films, for whatever issues they are so contextual due to the sheer quantity of them. It's not like there was 2 films and they brought it back 50 years later. This is an ongoing series across 50 years, and you can look at defining moments in history from these films, you know, from the origin of computers to the gadgets. You know, some things in these, not to sort of go on a tangent again, but some of the stuff you'll see in the Brosnan films, like a smartwatch, that's what we have these days. Back then, it's this, obviously we don't have lasers on them, but it's amazing just seeing that what their gadgets eventually become a normality as the years go by. But I think 1962, you know, they're not in fully with the Cold War yet. I think the Cuban Missile Crisis has been and gone and stuff, but this isn't the big Russian thing. Obviously, that's the next one. But I love the fact it was all in Jamaica. It felt different. It felt like him on a mission, and fair play to them for having pretty much the entire film set overseas.
Yeah, and I think, doesn't it bring in elements of the space race as well? I'm not great with my history. I don't know dates and stuff, but they mention, I think that's kind of, it's the weird thing with James Bond. There are so many elements to it, and, you know, lines of exposition. And I'm not going to lie, sometimes I do get confused with everything that's going on and characters and what their ultimate plan is. But I think they mentioned at the beginning that the plot is that there's about to be like a US rocket launch that's going to be sabotaged by Dr. No, and, you know, he's got to go and sort of investigate that. But yeah, I mean, James Bond fundamentally is a legacy character. He probably is the antithesis of a legacy character, really, in terms of cinema. I always say Batman and James Bond are probably like the biggest two for me, at least. And it is, you know, where they can be portrayed by different actors, but, you know, the films fundamentally move the same, and they do move with the ages and the ages of cinema as well, not just in terms of like real life goings on as well politically. We mentioned the villain. Should we actually talk about the titular character, the villain of this piece, Dr. No? I forgot everything about Dr. No. I couldn't remember his appearance, what his shtick was, or anything like that. So this was kind of rediscovering the character. I did make notes, as I mentioned. Now, I can't take credit for this comparison. Now, the character of Dr. No is a half German, half Chinese person. And with it being set in 1962, I did fear the worst of what this might mean in terms of cinema practice at the time, especially with like a Chinese character or something like that. And my fears were met when I saw the character of Dr. No. So Joseph Wiseman plays him. I can't take credit for this. Someone says that he looks like a Thunderbird. And he absolutely does. It's the waxy face. It's the Scotch tape. Thank God he didn't have buck teeth or anything like that, because I was fearing this like horrible stereotype at the time. Now, obviously, with us being in 2021, that shit isn't okay in films. You would never be able to do that nowadays. And this might sound horrible of me, but it is. I don't agree with it, but it was the practice in Hollywood at the time. It is just what you come to expect. So I'm not saying it's okay, but it was 1962, and that's what was happening. As a villain, though, it does kind of bring in elements of what we would see from future villains, in that it's the very stoic kind of, you know, the mannerisms that they speak, that before I kill you, Mr. Bond, it's the very high-collared grey outfits they have. And he does have a gimmick. He has the hands that he lost due to radiation poisoning, I guess, with the claws, and he crushes the statue. So there's a lot of neat things about him. I don't know if I'd say he's one of the best Bond villains. I think by far there are some great ones as we go throughout this franchise, but there's enough there, and he dies in a suitably comical way, I think, in terms of a James Bond film. So mixed bag on the character. I don't think he quite has the impact that the film builds him up to be at the end, but I think it was the appearance that was a little bit, you kind of inhale sharply through gritted teeth.
Yeah, he's a weird one. I think when it's so long since you've seen it, as in not watching it for the very first time, knowing this film is called Doctor No and the villain is called Doctor No, you're expecting not to get too modern, like a Joker, like, oh, he must be so important if the thing obviously is actually the book. And it's really interesting with him because we don't get him till like the last sort of 15-20 minutes. And one thing of these early Bond films as well is that you don't get credits. Like, when the clock says 1 hour 49, it's finishing on 1 hour 48:50. It's not the norm. And I always, because I don't care for this film massively, I've never really looked at the villain angle of that. And it is that Bond sort of goof that, what's his thing? Oh, he's got the hands. Aha, his hands couldn't save him when it mattered. And it's always really strange watching him and everything. And I think where he is, even though I think they're meant to be in Jamaica, everyone with him is Asian as well, and it's very much building with stereotypes. And obviously, China's wasn't the superpower then it is now. I couldn't imagine them trying to make a half Chinese, half German villain for modern cinema. That would just cause chaos. And obviously, maybe Rami Malek will be playing a new version of Doctor No. We'll find out this September, because there's been many interesting theories, discussions, and rumors. Nothing confirmed, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens in that new film. But I don't really care for him. What I will say about him, the only thing I like is that he mentions Spectre. Not to get franchise baiting, but that's such a cool thing that, not to say we live in a Marvel world and all that stuff, but, the fact that they wanted Bond on a multi-picture contract back then, the fact that they were planning sequels, and they were probably already so far into development on the second one by the time they'd even written, maybe. And I love all the little Spectre stuff. It's more the Connery films, and this is where the Connery ones stand out to me. It feels earned, the build-up of Spectre, the build-up of going to Blofeld and all of that, whereas Roger Moore like darts from villain to villain and things like that. And I love what they do in the 60s when it feels so much more linear. And I think Doctor No is a good starting point for future films to come back to it and be like, you killed Doctor No. We don't care he killed Doctor No. He's just a weird radiation villain as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, he's not, to me, he's not a top tier Bond villain at all.
Yeah, and I think the film, you mentioned that the Spectre name dropped towards the end of the film. I think that's having the benefit of having so many books released at that point. I'll probably have to check for the next review, actually, how many books were released up until that point. But I know that Thunderball was the one, in terms of the books, was the one that introduced Spectre as a thing. So they were kind of cherry picking from here and there, probably knowing where the books were leading and knowing they wanted a franchise on their hands. So, name dropped sort of like the big villainous organization, which they do spell out what it stands for. And I forgot now what Spectre stands for. It was a very, very corny name. They need to work on that anagram.
I've got it here. It's Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, and this is the best bit, and Extortion.
Yeah.
It's such a, I guess probably when the Marvel Comics were thing with S.H.I.E.L.D., it was probably the same time, but I love those names, and it's just Spectre. And obviously there was a rights battle for many decades about that name. I'm still annoyed it was the title of a film, I won't lie. But it's just, classic old school. Let's have these villainous people, and this is before we get to the villain tables as well, before we have the round tables of doom and all of that stuff. It's amazing seeing those such early days of the Bond films.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, they kind of had a roadmap of knowing where they wanted to go. And it'll be interesting going to, obviously, the rest of the films that we have from Russia with Love, because I do think that the death of Dr. No, I don't know if he gets name dropped, but Spectre as a whole, I know that is something that does continue. And I think the events of this movie, I think the first few Bond films do have sort of a connective tissue. You can watch them all individually as their own thing. I think even on Her Majesty's Secret Service has elements where it refers to a few of the gadgets from previous films, and it's a very bizarre franchise overall when you look at it, because even with Casino Royale, it's basically down to the casting of Judi Dench. I don't want to jump so far into the franchise, but people are going, oh well, it's a continuation because it's still the same character. Judi Dench is playing But it very much, each incarnation feels like a spiritual successor in a way, loosely connected together, but you can very much watch them individually. I think that's what one of the biggest appeal is, actually, of the James Bond franchise overall. So we've talked about Bond himself, we've talked about the villain. I think we have to talk about the Bond girl, because that is, an element that is synonymous with all of the James Bond films. We have Ursula Andres, who I think, I mean, from what I've heard in conversations, is a fan favorite. I think probably because it goes back to, the original Bond girl. I have the names of the people because these weren't cast, these weren't credited, sorry. Because she was dubbed. She had a very, Ursula Andres, the actress, had a very thick Swiss German accent, so they dubbed her. So the dialogue was dubbed by Nikki van der Zyl, and her singing voice was dubbed by a woman called Diana Coupland. It's very interesting. It's so noticeable that she was dubbed, though, in this film, watching it again. I don't know how noticeable it would have been at the time. But as a Bond girl, and it's 2021, I've got to be very delicate how I say this now. She looks an absolute $1 million, and that's entirely why she was cast. The Bond girls are meant to be seen and not heard. There is meant to be an inherent sex appeal, which elevates James Bond's character. You could write dissertations on this. You probably did if you did some kind of, it's like the crisis of masculinity. The women are seen as a trophy, like an extension of James Bond. It's the fancy cars, it's the gadget, it's the suits, it's the classic adage of all women want to be with him and all men want to be him, and that it translates into the Bond girls. She doesn't really do anything in the plot. I think there's even a line, and I would have loved to have written it down when I was watching the movie, where I think it's where they see that flamethrower tank coming towards them, and he's with the guy on the island, and he says, right, I'm going to take out the headlights, you take out the guy. And he just turns to Ursula Andress and he goes, just make yourself scarce, just hide somewhere, just like keep yourself safe. And that's it. That's all she does. She very much is the damsel in distress, but it's tradition in these films. And, there's nothing wrong with tradition, because if they break that trend now, some people might like it by modern standpoints. And you could argue that maybe Bond is a franchise that needs to evolve. But I don't think you make it 24 films in. They have a formula and it's worked for 24 films. Don't break it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And James Bond, in my opinion, certainly isn't broken. Maybe fragmented slightly, but at least in terms of this, with the Bond girl, just keep it what it is. They know what it is. And this film, being 1962 as well, I don't think it does it many favors in that regard.
Yeah, I think sort of modernized as well. The modern Bond films have done much better in terms of representation for women as well. I think when you bring in characters like Vesper, even looking at we've got Anna Diarmas popping up as in time, and we're getting Madeline Swan back, who is a returning character, which very, very rarely happens for a Bond girl. Maybe it'd be the first one. I would need to double check that actually, but it was always a problem. I think the Craig era has put that definitely in the right place. And I'm excited to see what other plans. Back in the day, there was rumors of a Halle Berry spin-off franchise when with her character from Die of the Day, and it didn't happen. It almost happened, and even in that film, she's just treated as like a sex object. And they are in so many Bond films, but that is something they've drastically improved as the decades have gone by. But even starting in '62, I would say politely, it got a lot worse in the late '60s, which we'll be getting to, no doubt. But it's looking at that, how generations have changed and stuff, and I'm glad the films have had the maturity to evolve but not drop anything. They've got much better in terms of casting, representation, and all that kind of stuff. And it's more that you can't release a Bond film 2020 pretending it's from the 60s. It wouldn't work. Not saying that they need to modernize, but I'm saying that just the concept, the villainous angle, everything just doesn't work. And I think the one thing the franchise has nailed is adapting as the times have gone by. And there is a cycle, which I will say, which I'll probably bring up every time we finish off a Bond actor himself. If you look at the journey of every James Bond actor, they always start quite deadly, quite serious, very eyes on. And when you get to their last film, they're ridiculously over the top. You sit thinking, what on earth is this? How has it got to this? And that's when you know a recasting's coming soon. Obviously, I'll exclude Lazenby and Dalton out of that because they've got so few between them. But certainly for the other ones and what some of the stuff looks like with Craig, you can see that coming. Yeah,
I think this goes for any franchise really, but when it reaches the realms of self-parody, It's time to change it up. Yeah, and it seems to be the formula of not just like characters, but just film franchises in general when they keep cranking out sequels. I don't know why. I don't know if it's like an inherent, we've got to go bigger and better. And, you do that for so many consecutive films, it does reach the realm of ridiculousness. So, yeah, we'll get to those. There's plenty in the James Bond franchise. We'll definitely get to those. We got to talk about the music to this thing because, my God, you can't have any of these films without the music. Now, actually, this was news to me. I thought the person who did the music was is it John Barry? Yeah, John Barry. I thought he was, his name is always the one that's mentioned with James Bond. Name that's not thrown out all that much is Monty Norman. Monty Norman did the soundtrack to this film and did write. Apparently, there were multiple lawsuits actually as to who actually wrote the James Bond theme. Some people claiming it was John Barry all along. Others, claiming it was Norman. He did write the James Bond theme. Norman wrote the James Bond theme, and then that was picked up by John Barry, and you could say, revitalized it, rejigged it, whatever you want. It's always that, maybe to a lesser degree, but how you have Klaus Badelt doing the music to Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl, and then Hans Zimmer comes along and just, blows the doors open on it. It is taking those themes, and I don't think enough credit is given to Norman because what a main theme from the, the intro, which is just so iconic to Bond. And it's recurring repetition throughout the film as well, especially at the casino table as well. Such a great theme. Easily, my God, you'd probably have it in the top 5, top 3 maybe, even of best film songs, soundtracks of all time, certainly for a character theme. It's tremendous. And I did make another note as well. There's no like Bond theme in this one per se. There is some other music that crops up. There's a reggae version of Three Blind Mice that plays over the intro. You probably wouldn't count that as like a James Bond song. I did write on here, I'm going to quote it exactly. Under the Mango Tree is an absolute earworm. I love that song, and I'm probably going to be singing that for the rest of tonight. Love it. It's like the Calypso song set in Jamaica. It was great. But yeah, it's the James Bond theme. Like, come on. What more is there to say?
Like, I'm trying to think of the right word. You look at soundtracks, you look at themes, individual themes, and there is a category above everything else. And it's like, you have never, ever, ever seen the film and you know the theme. There are very few that are genuinely there. Bond is there. The Star Wars theme is there. There is no Marvel. There is no DC. There is no Star Trek. I'd even go as far as say Lord of the Rings. Godfather, maybe even not. Maybe not. It's there, but that elitist tier that's so far up that nothing compares. Bond sits up there, the Star Wars main theme. I'm not saying soundtrack, I'm not saying everything like that. We're saying in terms of recognition of a random person in the street in any country in the world, they will tell you that is for Bond. And I think it's amazing seeing the evolution, how they never dropped it, how they knew they had this in the bag, and obviously that then allowed us to get the Bond themes. We'll know them as come in as the years go by with the pre-credit sequences, and the score itself, the orchestra stuff. I love. I think when they've got the individual moments, and we even get, I was going to say the crawl, then we even get the sort of kind of first gun barrel done very differently. Again, they've not yet certified how they want to do it, what they want to do with it, but everything was in play. And what I love is that, sort of not taking the piss out of it again, but it's really weird bringing up No Time to Die so much in this video. Hans Zimmer's doing the score for the new Bond film still, and they released that one song, which is 50 seconds long, and it's just called No Time to Die gun barrel sequence, and it's the Bond theme. Everyone knows what it is, and it's, I don't know if you're a composer, if that's something they're all desperate to do. I wouldn't say it's like a Star Wars where it must get ticked off the to-do list, but for a composer, it's probably pretty special to get given a chance to record that. But it all started with this, and I think it is not to compare it to the dialect ones that we get in the new ones, but this stands the test of time more than anyone could probably have ever imagined.
Yeah, you can't get rid of this theme. Like, especially 24 films in. Like, the day that they drop that theme, it's not a James Bond. It's a fascinating franchise, really, James Bond, and obviously we'll go more into it as we go throughout the films. I think it's going to be like fascinating discussion as we go through. It is those core elements, and all of those elements have to be working for it to be, like people talk about the plots to films. With James Bond, it's never really that. It's always, what's the theme for this one? Who's playing Bond in this one? Who's the Bond girl? And it is those individual elements that all come together to make it into the franchise that it is. I wanted to mention the soundtrack. Another thing, I would say that the soundtrack to this film is quite understated. Actually, you've got like the main theme, but in terms of like music throughout, it's very incidental. There's a lot of silent moments actually where the action just kind of plays out without the soundtrack. There is a great moment from the soundtrack though, which me and you both mentioned when we were talking before we went live. It's the scene where they plant the spider as he's sleeping. And as he kills the spider, that the music's in time with him whacking the spider. I love stuff like that where the soundtrack syncs up. So I thought that was a neat moment. And speaking of neat moment, I guess we can talk about some of our favorite moments in the film. I'm trying to think of one that I haven't already mentioned, because the one that I was going to go with was the introductory scene to James Bond at the casino table. I've already mentioned that. We've already talked about that a lot. So I'm going to pass over to you, and I'm going to try and think of another moment to be a little bit different. But I think that probably is the best moment, really, isn't it?
It's the best moment by Kutcher. I love the three blind mice. I don't know why. There was just always something about them that these guys pretending to be blind just to then murder people. It's so strange, but I always loved it. I don't know why. It's not even a great scene. It's just those three. And it's, again, I wouldn't even say the henchmen, but when you get the Bond films as the years go by, you do get those henchmen that are as important to me as the main villains. I casting them, and the three blind mice are some of those iconic images. Yes, they're just hitmen. In terms of other scenes itself, it's in absolute truth. There's not much. I love the scene on the beach with her when they're trying to stay low and are they bluffing, and I always forget his name, but the guy that gets massacred. I love the whole dragon thing. Like, it's a dragon. He's like, it's being ran on D's and it's not a dragon, but that poor guy gets massacred, putting his understatement. Like, you see that it's not like there's sort of fire and they cut away. Like, you see his burning body with it, and the not fair play, but it's like, that is you can imagine that's graphic to us maybe now. Back then, that was probably sort of, whoa, was that allowed to be a thing? And I love that whole tank design, but in all absolute truth, there aren't too many favorite scenes for me. I think I've got more in the later films, but it's those early setting the rhythm you're figuring out. Maybe I'll give a quick shout out to the scene where he pretends to be in the bed when he's waiting on the chair, when he goes to kill the teacher at the school. I love the guy. It's like a Batman conversation. One of the problems with Batman is we never actually get to see him like do detective work. With Bond, very rarely these days we actually see him spying on people or like using his brain, because obviously real life spies are a thing for people that don't know. It's not just James Bond, and you have to be very intelligent, like way beyond anyone could probably comprehend. And it's not even that smart, but it's just the whole, like pillow in the beds, waiting for him, putting the coat in the other room so he assumes he's in bed with her, all that kind of stuff I love. And it's just Sean Connery just doing that stuff as well. He's so good at that, sort of not charming, but you can tell he's a bit smarter than the others. Like, there is a brain in there, and he's got the brawns to fight as well. I love that scene.
Yeah, I love the sound of the silencer as well. That was another note that I made. Just the sound effect of that was so cool. Yeah, I like that moment as well. And he puts like the strand of hair, doesn't he, over the crack in the door. Elements like that was really cool. You mentioned the beach scene. I think, that's another iconic moment. I think probably because it's the Bond girl, right? It's the iconic moment. The bit where he starts singing Under the Mango Tree. It's just Connery baritone, and he just belts out this song. That was a nice moment. I think that's quite an iconic moment to it. I like the car chase as well, and I've always had like a love for this as well with like old TV shows. The really shitty backgrounds they have when they're driving. It cuts to a wide shot and you can see the path that the road is going, and it cuts them in the car and the background's completely different. You have probably one of your first James Bond one-liners as well, where the car careers off a cliff and for some reason blows up, because every car that goes over a cliff has to blow up. And he says, like, I think he was on his way to a funeral. Not one of James Bond's finest one-liners, but it's nice to see even there were starts to them from the first movie. So yeah, that kind of moments, I think for this, and this goes into my final thoughts really, it's more iconic moments to the character and the cinema history of the character rather than the film itself. As a film overall, I wasn't a massive fan of it, and I know that as we go on, there are much better James Bond films. I think it's a fine first outing. It's got most of the elements that we come to expect from a James Bond film, but obviously a couple of films in, by the time we get to Goldfinger, certainly that's where, okay, they've got the formula down now. So it's fine. I will say I really hate the day for night shots. I get that it's expensive to shoot at nighttime and you've got all the lighting. So there's a lot of shots that were clearly filmed at daytime and they've just darkened it in post, and it's almost incomprehensible at some points to see what's going on. I did read elements that they removed from the book. Apparently in the book, James Bond fights a giant squid, which seems completely ridiculous. That seems like something that would maybe come into it in one of the Roger Moore films. And I think in the book they escape on the dragon. So it would have been nice to have seen that come back, because I thought that vehicle was cool as hell. I'd have loved to have seen more from the dragon in it. But yeah, I guess that's sort of my final thoughts. It's fine. I appreciate it more for its place in cinema history and the first origin for this character.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same as you. That this is very much a film that you put on out of respect. And that sounds horrible, but like if you're like, I'm going to watch a Bond film today, it's like, okay, you can narrow it down. Which Bond would you pick? I'm going to go with Connery. Okay, you ain't picking Doctor No. You're picking Goldfinger. You're picking You Only Live Twice. Maybe even Thunderball at an absolute push. And this one is iconic and it is the introduction. But to me, it isn't quite. Not saying it's not James Bond. It isn't quite there. Like, they haven't finessed what this franchise is going to be, but they're certainly setting things up. And as you said, for a first outing, it's him on a mission. There's no big saving the universe stakes as well. This is him on a mission. He encounters a threat. He saves the mission. He goes home. It's that kind of stuff that some of the later films do forget about. So it does have its moments. However, I think they're few and far between. Looking at it from a modern perspective, maybe this was groundbreaking back then, but certainly if you look at the film that introduced it all, I think Doctor No does a fine job of that. And I'm going to make a horrific comparison, which people might get upset about. I'm going to compare it to Fast and Furious. You look at those early Fast and Furious films, they didn't have a formula just yet. They were actually films about car racing, and it was never really about that. Now it certainly isn't. And I think Bond is in that parallel. It's not been about the spine for quite a while now. So, yeah, my final thoughts, not to know, it's you only put it on when you're watching the series, not out of choice. And if there are people, do comment your thoughts on that, because I'd be curious, not as a horrible way, but I'm just curious if there are people that are attached to this maybe more so than some of the others.
Really briefly before we sign off, I do want to talk about some other people, because I know that these served their tenure in the James Bond franchise. We forgot to talk about them. I love Moneypenny. I love the dynamic between James Bond and Moneypenny. Lois Maxwell, I think she's absolutely tremendous. She's my favorite Moneypenny. I love that dynamic. You've got you actually have Felix in this as well. Felix Leiter, who's a recurring James Bond character, played by Jack Lord. I think he only played him once though in these films. I think he was recast later down the line. I can't remember which film that Felix comes back into. That's a thing with a lot of the James Bond films, and we'll get into those as we go through. There are a lot of recastings. There's even actors that play multiple roles in the franchise. Those will be coming later, but I just wanted to throw them out there because they are sort of like central supporting characters, and I do like that element to it as well. But yeah, I think we've said everything that we can on Dr. No, so we're going to hand over to you guys now. If you're a James Bond fan, please do comment below with your thoughts on Dr. No and the James Bond franchise overall. As we said, you can expect another one later this week. We will be doing our review on From Russia with Love, which is coming this Friday, the 30th of April. And then after that, you can expect one James Bond review a week, all the way up until the release of No Time to Die. So it's exciting. I'm excited to go through these films. As I mentioned, I haven't gone through them all. This has been a really fun discussion today, and I know there's a lot more to be said as we go throughout these films. So it's going to be really fun. As always, follow us on our social medias for more information, not just on this franchise that we're going into, but we'll have plenty of other videos coming as well. That's Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinema Savvy, and TeePublic link in the description down below. I'm going to bring up that very nice graphic once again. Those are the new shirts on display, so do help support us. That very nice James Bond one right there in the middle. I'm probably going to be picking one of those up as well, because I think those are some really nice shirts. But this has been a great discussion. There's been a lot of fun, so thank you to everyone that's watched this, and we'll see you on that next video. Take care, everyone.